Hi, and welcome back to Grassroots Crypto, where I like to teach people about crypto. This video is part 3 of my tour of THORChain, and if you haven't checked out part 1 and 2, you can do that here. So this is part 3, and today I'll be covering the features that help make swapping, saving, and lending work. In this video, we'll be looking at the current features implemented in THORChain today, such as streaming swaps, synthetics and POL, and how they relate to savers, as well as swapper Clout and trade accounts. Then we'll look at the features planned, such as memoless swaps, order books, and rapid swaps. There's a lot to get into, so let's get started. First, we have streaming swaps. And as discussed in part 1, streaming swaps allows you to add time to your swaps to get better price execution. There's no actual discounts, it's just how you break up the trade in order to get a better price when you're conducting multiple swaps. This is very good for large trades. So as a normal swap goes, we're doing all the trading or the one large swap generally in one block, and streaming swaps allows you to do this over multiple blocks instead of one hit. The lowest fee a streaming swap can achieve is 5 basis points or 0.05%, allowing THORChain to be very competitive, if not cheaper, than centralized exchanges. Streaming swaps are enabled for saving and lending by default at the same 5 basis points fee. Now, savers has 4 swaps on entry and exit, and lending has 8 swaps on entry and exit. So streaming swaps allows savers and lendings to be used with large amounts without incurring the very large fees, because they can break up those trades into smaller portions. So how does streaming swap work? Well, as discussed, we take a large trade and we move this into multiple sub trades or mini trades. And then arbitrageurs will come along and rebalance the pool. So what does that mean? When a swapper swaps, just say they're swapping Bitcoin for RUNE, they're adding Bitcoin and taking out RUNE, and they're taking the pool out of balance. By breaking up the trade, we're allowing arbitrageurs to essentially reverse that swap and bring the pool back into balance. Because the more you take the pool out of balance, the more you need to pay. So essentially, you're only nudging the pool out of the balance each time that you're conducting a mini swap. So as we can see here, a trade is conducted, and then that takes the pool out of balance, and then the arbitrager rebalances the pool, and so on and so forth, until the swap is conducted. Then there's one outbound, say you're swapping Bitcoin for Ethereum, there's one outbound to the swapper. So Alice puts in the Bitcoin. This trade is broken up into, say in this example, 5 sub trades or 5 mini swaps, and then the one output, the output of all this is sent to Alice. And then this is spread over multiple blocks. The swaps are usually spread out sequentially over a number of blocks instead of all in just one block, as we talked about. So this does add a time dimension, but say the swap is spread over 10 blocks, it can be 90% cheaper than doing it all in one block and only takes 1 minute longer. For more information on streaming swaps, check out these great articles from THORChain University, a bit of a beginner one here, and then with a bit more details here. And then you can also see I've created a video explaining streaming swaps and going through some of the details. In the future, streaming swaps can be combined with another feature plan called limit orders to compress the time required for large swaps to occur whilst achieving a reduced slip fee or achieving these better price efficiencies. And we'll talk about that later on in this video. Synthetics. Synthetics are a way of moving value of a supported THORChain asset onto THORChain's own blockchain. It allows a user to work with an asset within THORChain, like Bitcoin, but with very fast transactions and reduced wait times. While it is generally used by advanced traders and arbitrageurs, savers also use the synthetics under the hood. So how does it work? When a user wants to swap Bitcoin to synthetic Bitcoin, it is sent to a special vault. Half of the asset is swapped for RUNE, and it sits in the network as 50% asset and 50% RUNE. Then the user is given a synthetic BTC token that represents the value of the BTC they deposited minus the swap fees. So this represents this synthetic token that's living on the THORChain blockchain represents this native Bitcoin that's been sent and lives in the deposit. And the value is going to be the same minus the swap fees. So when we talk about swap fees, to mint a synthetic, so an example would go from Bitcoin to synthetic Bitcoin, it'll be a double swap. So there'll be two swaps from Bitcoin to RUNE, or native Bitcoin to RUNE, and then from RUNE to synthetic Bitcoin. To mint or create, it's always from RUNE to the synthetic asset, and to redeem, it's always from the synthetic asset to RUNE. So to work with L1 assets like we talked about, it's always a double swap in order to create it, and to redeem, we'll be doing a double swap back. So the synthetic asset to RUNE, and then RUNE through to the native asset. This minting and redeeming process is the same process for savers, except when a saver deposits native Bitcoin, the synthetic Bitcoin is deposited into the saver's vault instead of them able to hold it directly. And when they withdraw, they're withdrawing the synthetic BTC, and then that is swapped to RUNE in order to produce the L1 asset that they've requested to withdraw. In both situations, the actual synthetic Bitcoin is 50% asset and 50% RUNE that is held inside of the liquidity pool. Synthetics are immune from an permanent loss, but they don't receive any income either. And as we talked about before, Savers Vault do receive income. However, it's a reduced income or a less of an income compared to liquidity providers. You can see more information about Savers Vaults, as well as protocol on liquidity that I'm going to run through in a minute, inside of this THORChain University article. And I also have a video that goes through synthetics specifically, as well as a 3-part synthetic series on my YouTube channel. Let's quickly talk about protocol owned liquidity, or POL. POL is where THORChain itself, specifically the reserve, becomes a liquidity provider to add space for savers, as there is only so much space for savers, and specifically there's only so much space for synthetics. So how does it work? THORChain monitors how much liquidity there is in savers in relation to the cap. And there's this cap here, and this is simply saying that it's really synthetics that's a part of the pool, because synthetics underpin savers. So if this particular portion of the pool, or you could say it's savers, but it's really synths, goes beyond this cap, then THORChain will be adding RUNE, one-sided or asymmetrical addition of RUNE into the liquidity pool to increase the liquidity provider section, and that will essentially be reducing the synthetic, or you could say the savers portion of the pool. If the reverse is true, just say the savers amount or the synths amount is very low, it can start to remove some of the liquidity that it's added into the liquidity pool. There are security limits for all of this and services to ensure things don't go out of hand and that we don't see something like this. Specifically, there's the incentive pendulum, there's the saving caps, and there's a bunch of Mimir configurations or network setting configurations to ensure everything is where it needs to be. To get more information on POL, you can have a look at the THORChain University article that we talked about before, or you can check out my video that's specific on synth savers and POL. Next, we have Clout. Whenever you have an outbound of THORChain, you can expect there to be some delay. That's because it's a security feature. And this delay can be up to an hour, hour and 20. So Clout allows traders or traders that use THORChain a lot to have immediate or near immediate outbounds. And this is because they've used the system a lot. And essentially their slip fee, or the fees they pay when they swap within THORChain, and swapping is done as we've talked about before, whether it be swapping, saving, or during lending. Those fees contribute to what's known as this Clout score, and that Clout score can be utilized to reduce the outbound delay for a particular user, and then that has the effect of reducing the outbound delay for all users in a way, because essentially the queue is not going to be as long because there's less people in it. Because the high power users are able to get out of that queue a bit quicker. I did quite an in-depth video on Clout, so you can check that out on my channel. But just as a comparison, this was in the first week from the actual issue. As you can see here, we have the outbound delay with Swapper Clout and then without Swapper Clout. And you can see a noticeable difference in the red line as opposed to the blue line with regards to how long a user's going to wait for a particular output. And that's the 1 hour delay here. To learn more about Swapper Clout, you can read the docs here. It's a very interesting feature enabling better user experience for the end users. And also you can check out my video that I did here, which is quite an in-depth look at Swapper Clout and the effect that it has on the outbound delay, which is that security feature. Next, we have the newest implemented feature within THORChain, trade accounts. And trade accounts allow arbitragers or professional traders to utilize THORChain. It's very similar to the way that they use synthetics at the moment. However, it's going to be more capital efficient. E.g., they need less funds in order to arb or to rebalance those pools that we've talked about before, or to trade assets. Now, while the slip fee is the same when they're conducting swapping, they're not going to be subject to the same inbound and outbounds like they are with normal assets or synthetic assets. So therefore, the overall trade experience using trade accounts is going to be a little bit cheaper. As a bit of a flow for how they work, you put your L1 asset into a trade account and it gets redeemed one-to-one. There's no like slip fees or stuff like that like there is with synthetics. That then resides within your trade account, and then you can use that to swap amongst assets. And then that trade asset within the trade account stays within THORChain. So there's no inbound or outbound fees, only if you're going to be swapping with native RUNE itself, in which case that wouldn't change. When you want to withdraw, you put the request in, and then the trade asset is going to get swapped one-to-one or converted one-to-one back into the L1, and then that'll be sent to you. So you'll be just paying a normal L1 withdrawal fee. Trade accounts is a pretty cool feature. You can read more about it here on the dev docs and have a look at some of the examples on how to utilize them, as well as how to view the current balances. If you want more information, obviously you can read the dev docs, or you can have a look at the video I made that goes into trade accounts in some degree of detail. Now, let's move on to some of the planned features within THORChain. So these have not been implemented yet, but have been proposed and hopefully will be implemented sometime into the future. And the first one is Memoless Transactions, or as I like to call it sometimes, Memoless Swaps. I kind of correct myself there because it can be more than just swaps. It can be memoless, adding to savers, withdrawing from savers, adding to liquidity pools, or lending, whatever. It's just a way you can really put memos in without putting memos in. Let me explain. So memos can be quite long and complicated. Like this is a swap memo from the inbound asset to Ethereum and send it to that address. You can put limbs. So that's like the minimum amount of asset you want based on the input. And then you can do streaming swaps and pay affiliates and so on. They can be quite complex. So a memoless transaction essentially allows you a way to register a memo so it can be used later. And that's like getting a quote. So you send this memo in, and it's going to be based off the inbound chains. That's what has a BTC prefix, or it's going to have a chain prefix. And then you put the memo you want. Then THORChain remembers that, and it's going to issue you back a short code. And you can think of that short code like a quote, like you would go to the mechanic, get a quote, has all the quote details. So then if you reference that short code, or that quote code, that quote number, THORChain's going to know what you're talking about here. Now that short code you can use in two ways. One, you can refer to that as the memo inside of the next transaction. So if you're sending Bitcoin in, you can refer to this quote code, just say this is the quote code you got back, or the short code you got back. And then THORChain will know that you're talking about the memo that was registered before, whether it's a swap, or an add, or a loan memo. Or you can put the memo as the last 5 digits inside of the transaction amount, the inbound transaction amount, and then THORChain will know, well, assume, yep, that's a memo short code, and it will swap that for the memo for the short code it has registered. So if you were to send, Bitcoin in with some numbers at the front and these last 5 digits, and this code was registered, it would swap the inbound memo for what was registered there for that number, and then off it would process at night, normal. So this allows a couple of really cool things. So one, because the memo can be quite short, or much shorter than these long things, then inbound transaction costs will be small, because for most blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, there's a cost per character within the memo, because the longer or the more data within that transaction, the more on-chain cost there is. So therefore, the higher the transaction cost. Then this will allow THORChain to interact with memos that have shortened memo fields, like Bitcoin only takes 80 bytes. I think Memo only takes 16. And they can have complex memos with chains that have only room for short memo lengths, or ones that don't support memos at all. So there's quite a lot of benefits there with memoless swaps. And as I said before, the user can either decide to, or has a choice. They can either use the registered memo code or the short code, or they can just put that into the inbound amount. And then that would get processed the same way as if they were to send the whole memo in the inbound transaction. Just a couple other points. There's about 10,000 shortcodes per chain, and then they rotate every 24 hours. So if you haven't used that within 24 hours, then you'll need to go through and register it again. If you want to know more about Memoless Transactions, you can have a look at my in-depth video here. The next planned feature is order books, and order books essentially introduce a limit order. So at the moment, you do a market order, you buy or sell an asset at the current price, whatever that is. And the limit order is you buy and sell the asset at a set price or better. So as an example, just say I want to sell Bitcoin when the price gets to 70,000 and I want to wait for that to happen, I can send a limit order in and say that I want to swap my 1 Bitcoin and get at least 70,000 USDT. And then that will wait. And then when that price ratio hits, then obviously that swap would be processed. Now, just to explain that at a set price or better, if the price was 100,000 for Bitcoin and you put the same order in, give me at least 70,000 for my 1 Bitcoin, then obviously that'll be processed immediately. So it's one of those things, it's that price or better, or another way to say it, the order is executed only if the market reaches or surpasses the specified price. I went through the details in my detailed video on order books and wrapper swaps, but just to summarize, order books use trade assets, and they're looking for the ratio between the input amount you have and what's specified within what's known as the lim component of the memo, or the minimum output. And that's what's really how you would specify, for this inbound, I want to achieve at least this particular outbound. So I had a couple of use cases there. When implemented, the idea is you can view your open limit orders and then you can cancel them if you want. This obviously hasn't been implemented, so it's subject to change, and it's something that would be, I think, really, really cool to complete the spot trading component of THORChain. So then you could not only do a market order, but also you could do a limit order. To build on this even more, so with rapid swaps, you can combine streaming swaps, which we talked about before earlier on in the video, with limit orders. And then the limit orders will essentially arb the streaming swaps or a normal trade. So at a particular price point or a particular point in the XYK curve, if a normal order moves the pool, say up the curve, or changes the price, increases the price of one of the assets, the limit order can then be triggered, because obviously that ratio has been hit, and then it can arb it back into the other way. So essentially you can think about it as you do a swap, it moves the pool one way, and then that triggers then the limit order to be executed, and then it can move the pool back in the other way. So then the output is the pool is essentially brought back into balance by the limit order, even though they want to just do a normal trade. Like it's not, or it could be a specific arb trade. They've set it up deliberately, expecting that pool movement to move in a certain way. Or it could just be a normal swapper using a limit order in order to get a trade that they want. Well, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, or if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I'd appreciate that. The next video, obviously, we've got to do the tour of THORChain part 4, and that should be the last part, as well as to do a video on RUNE pool. That should be quite interesting. I do want to do an in-depth video on that one. So thanks for watching. Until next time.